I'd like to welcome everybody to this Zoom webinar. I am so pleased to be able to, I will introduce our guest in a moment, who's going to tell us about the Centennial Commission and how Tulsa will honor its centenary of the race massacre that occurred in 1921. We are coming right upon it. And before I do that, I just want to put in a plug for an event that will take place on Monday. We are going to hear about the story of a Tulsa race massacre survivor by the name of John Emerson Sr. And it's going to be a panel that will be moderated by Bridget Elder, who is works in OU Physicians as a nurse educator. And we'll have a distinguished panel, including Mr. Emerson's granddaughter, who works with us at OU. And so that's going to be Monday at noon. And you should have received an email where you can sign up for the Zoom link. But today we're going to hear about the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. And we're going to hear from Mr. Phil Armstrong, who is the project manager. And I have had the privilege of hearing Phil talk about the centennial of the, what events are planned. And in fact, what you're going to see today, I think, are some renderings of some absolutely incredible facilities that are going to be built to commemorate or honor the memories of those lives lost in the Tulsa Race Massacre, which is, as I'm sure you know, one of the America's worst incidences of racial violence this country has known on a mass scale. And obviously with the centennial coming up, there's been a lot more awareness in popular culture. There was the multi-Emmy award-winning show Watchmen on HBO that featured a recreation of the Greenwood District and the Tulsa Race Massacre. It won a number of Emmys, and Damon Lindelof, who's the creator of the series or the key adapter and director, did a public event with, I think, both Philbrook and Tulsa City County Library. If that kind of thing is of interest of you, I'm sure you can see recordings out there. But I want to introduce Phil Armstrong, who for some time has been the project manager and is really the man who makes it all come together. And he works closely with District 11 Senator Kevin Matthews, who is key in the state legislature. And I know U.S. Senator James Lankford has also been very supportive of these efforts. But Phil has lived in Tulsa for 2 decades. He comes from the great Buckeye State, the state of Ohio. We share that common background. And he's done a number of things, including he's worked in the corporate sector. He's worked as an entrepreneur. He's been in the restaurant business and serves on several nonprofit boards, including the Barthelm School of Music. And I've had the privilege of hearing Phil sing at a service, and I was absolutely blown away. So I have learned about Phil and the incredible job of organizational skill that he is, and you'll hear it firsthand. But then I couldn't believe how incredible of a singer he is. So this is not about his singing, but Phil, I'm handing things over to you, and I'm very excited to hear about the Centennial Commission.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schumann. It's really a pleasure. I was able to meet you last year, and you were invited to be a part of the commission, and you graciously accepted, and we actually got to meet and have lunch and talk and got to know you personally. And this has just been, it's exciting to see so many different individuals such as yourself really embrace this history and be in pivotal positions to collaborate and partner and help share and spread the word about historic Greenwood, this history, and then more so how this history is going to impact not only the city of Tulsa, but I believe our nation in substantive ways as it relates to racial relations, racial harmony, reconciliation that we need now more than ever. So I thank you for being a significant member of the Centennial Commission and being a colleague of mine. Today, I want to thank you all for the invite. I thank you to Bonnie Rucker and to Tracy Kennedy, who helped coordinate all of this. And I will appreciate you chiming in and having some questions. I promise I will leave you the most wonderful aspect of this is that we get to dialogue at the end. And so if you have any questions or things that you'd like to bring up to discuss, please put in the chat window, and we will definitely have the opportunity to discuss and leave room for that. But without any further ado, I want to jump right into the presentation itself and talk about Greenwood Rising, talk about the museum, talk about the History Center, and give you the awareness and the education of what we are doing as a Centennial Commission and the planning for 2021 as well as 2021 and beyond. I say all the time, please, citizens of Tulsa, 2021 is not the ending point. It's not a moment of kumbaya and holding hands and singing, and then we go back to our respective corners. Next year is really a launching pad for the next 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years of a trajectory for this nation and the city of Tulsa, and what Greenwood Rising is going to bring overall for everyone that comes to see this history and comes to visit the historic Greenwood district. So I'm going to share my screen and get right into the presentation and give it a moment to load here. And if you can just give me a thumbs up when you see Greenwood Rising. Excellent. So what you're about to view is going to be partial history and partial rendering, partial review of what Greenwood Rising itself will be in 2021, the history, the legacy of Black Wall Street. The first thing I want to show, and I'll let you know, I'm going to show the first 3 minutes and 39 seconds of the sequence from what Dr. Schumann already mentioned, the HBO Watchmen on Sunday night, October the 20th, 2019. For those who had an HBO subscription from all over the world, we're tuning in to see DC Comics rendition, life-like rendition of this popular Watchmen, and which had a tremendous following. What they were not expecting was the debut of Tulsa 1921 to be the pinnacle of the Watchmen itself on HBO. And so imagine for these fans and for these people around the world on a Sunday night, tune in anticipation, and the first 3 minutes, what they experience and what they see is this portion that I'm about to show. And I will give you a heads up, it is a bit graphic. There is a little bit of violence that's in it. So for those that may not want to see this, you may want to tune out and just time back in the next 3 minutes. But I do want to give that bit of notice that this will be graphic visual information. And we're going to talk about this, the reality of it, the Hollywood production of it, and put it into context. So I'm going to adjust my computer sound, and then let's watch this together. So let's stop there for a moment before we go back to the presentation. I'd like to kind of give some context and description about that video. About 2017, I believe, as you know, some of the actors for the HBO Watchmen, local Tim Blake Nelson, Hollywood actor who's actually a Tulsa native. Primarily, I believe he was one of the responsible persons that really gave the idea that the HBO Watchmen crew should come to Tulsa and get this information, get this history, spend a couple of days here, and that they did. To their credit, they didn't make this big grandiose announcement, hey, HBO Watchmen's doing a show and we're gonna be in Tulsa. They actually came here and nobody knew that they were here. And I think that was really lends to their credibility. They visited the Greenwood Cultural Center. They visited John Hope Franklin Park. They took time to get history from the Tulsa Historical Society. And they spent some time looking and seeing what the Centennial Commission was working on so that they can go back and provide a more realistic and accurate depiction. And so what you saw on that Hollywood depiction of moments within the massacre itself was probably the most accurate, real, visual representation of what took place. Even, yes, with the planes flying over, those are eyewitness accounts that are held to this day at the Oklahoma Historical Society, and the number of Black citizens, white citizens, and survivors that talked about planes flying over the morning of June the 1st, dropping what was referred to as kerosene bombs, or what we call incendiary devices that were burning the buildings and the houses from the rooftop down, that really did a lot of the damage and destruction. So let's talk about the video and give it context. They're the Dreamland Theater. It's a homage to the Lula Williams Dreamland Theater, where the young boy and the mother's playing the piano. During the height prior to 1921, the Dreamland Theater was a all-star, 5-star showcase facility. It boasted of having the first and only theater with air conditioning, whatever air conditioning would have been in 1921. But it was a theater that whites and Blacks came to see shows, and it was destroyed and never rebuilt after 1921. Also, the weeks after that debut, I spent, myself and other commission members, daily for the next 2 weeks on the phone with media outlets all over the country, even as far as BBC, and you can list them all: CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, even Inc. magazine, interview after interview, and they would say the same things. Number one, did you watch Watchmen? And they will say, how much of that was Hollywood hype and planes flying over, how much of that was real? And when you explain and give the history and let them know those were eyewitness accounts and actual depictions, then the second question they would always ask is, if this really happened in that way, how come nobody knows about it? That's the whole crux of why we're here. That for so many years after that, Black citizens, white citizens did not talk about this, did not discuss this. It was not taught in history books. And so you have, to this day, I get emails and phone calls and people that will talk to me, white and Black, that are in their late 20s, mainly mid 30s and some early 40s, that will to this day say, do you know the first time I ever even heard about this? I was in a college class outside of the state of Oklahoma, whether at University of Austin, Texas in Austin, or Berkeley or East Coast, the first time that they heard about it. And they will say the exact same things. They will say, I'm sitting in a class, the history professor is showing these images of Greenwood and Tulsa and the massacre, and everyone in the class is looking at me like, hey, aren't you from Oklahoma? And did this happen? And they have to sit there and say, this is the first time I have ever seen this. So they get embarrassed and they're shocked. Then the second thing they always say is, I got angry. Why would I have to be a grown adult, leave the state of Oklahoma to first hear about this? And so some of the work of the Centennial Commission is really premised on that, enlightening and educating citizens on this history, not to wallow in the destruction and wallow in the emotional side of this, but to bring awareness to people that this happened. This devastating event truly did happen, but more so to talk about the history of Greenwood and this entrepreneurial enclave of African-American exceptionalism that took place in Greenwood and even before Greenwood, the history of the all-Black towns of Oklahoma that we'll get into. I'm gonna share my screen and give one more point from the video that you just saw. You'll notice in the very beginning, the black and white silent film gave homage to Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves was the first Black deputy U.S. Marshal that served the territories of Oklahoma and Arkansas. As you can see there, in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, he was revered as one of the most successful U.S. Marshals that ever lived. He brought 3,000 fellows to justice and only had to kill 14 in his self-defense. He was known for his craftiness, and he would disguise himself and hide and figure out where his individuals and criminals that he would bring to justice. He was known for how crafty he was in bringing them in. And this story, the true life of Bass Reeves, is what gives credit to the character of the Lone Ranger, for those who are old enough to remember that. Hence the black mask on his face gives reference to the Lone Ranger is a depiction of the real life of Mr. Bass Reeves. And I'm sure many of you are getting a new wrinkle in your brain because you probably had never heard that before. So let's move on. The history of Greenwood and Black Wall Street. Tulsa's historic Greenwood district reflects the power of the human spirit generally, the vision, determination, and resilience. The key word through all of this history is the resilience, that enduring human spirit, resilience of its oppressed and marginalized Black citizens specifically. And that resilience can be seen, a lot of this history is drawn from Hannibal B. Johnson's book, Black Wall Street, that we use and that many historians use. He's been here in Oklahoma 30 years at studying this. He's actually written his 10th book most recently on this history. He's from Arkansas, but he is the foremost authority. And within this book, there is a letter that he uses to describe this resilience, a letter between Oliver and Curtis in the days after the riot. And I'll read it and you can see it here. Dear Oliver, I am by our local newspaper fully advised of the whole terrible tragedy there. Now that they have destroyed your homes, wrecked your schools, churches, and business places, and killed your people, I am sure that the Negroes will rapidly give up the town and move north. Enclosed, please find draft for $40 to purchase your ticket to Detroit. We'll be expecting you, Curtis. And this is Curtis's reply. Dear Curtis, Oliver's reply. Dear Curtis, how kind of you to volunteer your sympathetic assistance. It is just like you to be helpful to others in time of stress like this. True it is, we are facing a terrible situation. It is equally true that they have destroyed our homes. They have wrecked our schools. They have reduced our churches to ashes, and they have murdered our people, Curtis. But they have not touched our spirit. And while I speak only for myself, let it be said that I came here and built my fortune with that spirit. I shall reconstruct it here with that spirit, and I expect to live on and die here with it, Oliver. So with that spirit, we build Greenwood Horizon, an 11,000 square foot facility that will showcase the history of Black Americans in Oklahoma pre-Greenwood, going all the way from the history of how Black Americans even made it to Oklahoma with the 5 civilized tribes, and then Black boosterism that brought Black Americans to Oklahoma, and all of this occurring long before the land run of 1889. And it's going to be built right at the corner of historic Greenwood Avenue and Archer. Greenwood Avenue is the gateway to what was termed Black Wall Street. So even where we're building it has special significance to the history. And that term Black Wall Street, so that you know, was coined by Booker T. Washington when he visited Oklahoma in 1905. And he saw all these prospering historic Black towns from Langston to Boley, Oklahoma, to Taft, to Redbud, and the list goes on and on and on, of these Black towns where everything that was owned was Black, everything that were all the homes, the businesses, the banks, the grocery stores were all historic Black-owned towns. And when he came to Greenwood and visited Oklahoma, he mentioned and said, this is like being in a Negro Wall Street. And that's where that term came from. In the 60s and 70s, that term was changed to Black Wall Street, but he was the first to coin that phrase. I'm going to give you a couple more renderings and viewings of what the building will look like, and it will be built in time for the Centennial. Our goal is to dedicate the building by the 100th anniversary, which will be the week of May 31st, 2021. I'm going to go through some of the exhibits that you will see inside of Greenwood. This will be the first exhibit, the Greenwood Spirit, how Greenwood even came to be. And that was through the historic all Black towns of Oklahoma. This gives you a whole view. At one point in time, there were over 50 all Black towns incorporated and settled here in the Oklahoma Territory. Many were established before even 1880. So again, Greenwood's first start and the first business didn't happen until O.W. Gurley purchased and opened up a business back in 1906. So this all predates even Greenwood, these prospering all Black towns of the Oklahoma Territory. This gives you a whole layout and an understanding of how large Greenwood, the historic boundaries of Greenwood was. If you look in this lower corner here, this is where we are now today, the Oklahoma Eagle, this corner of Greenwood and Archer where Greenwood Rising will be, and the Greenwood Chamber buildings that you see, if you ever visit down here. And that's just, as you can see, people will see just a small portion of what Greenwood actually used to be. There were about 10 to 12,000 African Americans living within the historic district confines of what was Greenwood at that time. And so the History Center will showcase people like what you see before you, E.W. Ellis Walker Woods, who was the first principal of Booker T. Washington High School, and the true story of him actually walking over 600 miles from Tennessee to accept the appointment of getting hired as the first principal of Booker T. Washington. And much of the success and academic success of many African Americans are attributed to him. And there is a memorial on the campus of OSU-Tulsa, just north of where my office is now. It's called the E.W. Woods, Ellis Walker Woods, Booker T. Washington Memorial. But we'll showcase him and many, many others. As we continue on, we want this to be a very educational experience. We have the students there because we'll have alignments with the Tulsa Public Schools and various schools around the city and state to ensure that we have a robust field trip program bringing students here to learn this history. This is a narrative museum experience designed by local projects. They're based out of New York City. Local projects, they designed the 9/11 Museum in New York City, if any of you have ever been there. They also designed one that we got to see a couple of years ago in Montgomery, Alabama, working alongside of Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI. They developed the Legacy Museum, the history of African Americans from slavery to mass incarceration. And so their exceptional work at designing museum is what caught our eye. And so they are bringing our vision to life with some of the exhibit designs that you see here. Some of the information that I've already talked about, Black boosterism in the all Black towns, how these towns had newspapers and would send pamphlets all over the country telling other Black Americans to escape the harsh realities of a post-life after slavery and come to Oklahoma. We own land, we own businesses. We can pursue our dream of a prosperous life free from the racial onslaughts and the racial tenets of slavery. Come to Oklahoma. So that's where a lot of Black Americans came to Oklahoma. And even prior to that, during the Indian Removal Act of the 1830s, when they took the Trail of Tears, the 5 civilized tribes brought their slaves of African descent with them. For some of you, that might be another brain wrinkle moment. Many people will say, oh my gosh, I did not know that Indians owned slaves. Yes, the second largest holder of slaves in the South were the 5 civilized tribes. Cherokee Nation, the Creek Nation, the Seminole, Muskogee, they owned slaves and brought them with them, and they intermingled with them. They had children with them, they married, and that's what caused this reference to the term freedmen. Those Africans who can, African Americans who can directly tie their blood lineage to one of the 5 civilized tribes, and gives them full access and full rights to the rights of the tribe. And so this summer, when people were awakened, many were awakened to Juneteenth. Many those outside of the Black community had never heard of what is a Juneteenth and why do they celebrate. Many people were brought to the awareness this summer that besides July 4th and Independence Day, that African Americans in many communities celebrate another Independence Day, the Independence Day that many were freed and emancipated. 1863 is when Abraham Lincoln signed the Proclamation Act, but it wasn't until June 19th, 1865, that the last tenet of slaves that were being held in Texas were advised and told in Galveston that they had actually been freed. Imagine hearing that and to find out that 2 years ago you were freed, but 2 years later, June 19th. But on top of that, here in Oklahoma, it wasn't until June 14th, 1866, that the Muskogee Creek Nation released their slaves. So a whole year after 1865 is how the Native Americans still held on to their slaves until 1866. And when they released them, they actually released them and gave them, for those who can directly tie their blood lineage, they were given their fair share of allotments that was a part of the treaty. So some of them received anywhere from 40 to 200 acres of land all through Indian Territory. That's how the proliferation of these all Black towns were created, through land ownership, through their lineage, through the 5 civilized tribes. And so these towns proliferated, and by domino just kept getting more and more, and more towns were growing by land ownership, that these Black citizens could now immediately own land by their direct lineage through the 5 civilized tribes, is what caused these Black towns to be created. So we talk about that and go into in-depth of that history. And when we get to oil and gas discovery and the oil rights, and those that were able to get those royalty checks from those oil companies, if you own land and the oil company came knocking on your door, you had a fair share in those oil rights. And so African Americans became quite wealthy overnight, quite literally, which led to a Greenwood being born. As we go on, one of the other exhibits that will be showcased inside of Greenwood, we are so excited to be able to showcase this historical hologram Black barbershop experience to tell the history of the community. We have been advised that no other history center or museum in the world will have a Black barbershop narrative hologram experience to tell the history. And historically in the Black community, for those that study history know that historically Black citizens would get their community, their sense of connectivity, their leadership, their news, their camaraderie from 2 places, the Black church and the barbershop or the beauty salon. So to have this and to have it showcased in a way to show its pivotalness in the Black community is a wonderful, wonderful attribute that we'll have here. So these hologram experiences will tell the history of Greenwood and history of Oklahomans in America. And they will be interactive, so that if a young person sits in the chair, the hologram will turn and act as if it's cutting the young person's hair, and even speak to you in the mirror and say, never forget where you come from and who you are. So the interaction between these holograms we're really excited to be able to showcase that. We'll have a timeline that talks about the history and the arc of oppression that led up to a 1921. It was not an isolated event. There were many things that were leading to historical systems of oppression that led up to a 1921. from the enslavement of Africans arriving in 1619 to the Cotton Gin, to the Indian Removal Act and black codes and Jim Crow and segregation. As you can see here, December 8th, 1907, when Oklahoma becomes a state, their first congressional act, their first law on the books of Oklahoma is to establish Jim Crow. Then the lynchings of Laura Nelson and her son in Okemah, Oklahoma in 1911. And then you come to Red Summer. Red Summer, a historical moment that I would advise you all to go and search. Just search up Red Summer of 1919, and you will see over a dozen of racial incidents where white citizens and the Ku Klux Klan would just invade black communities and literally just terrorize and destroy them. All happened between the summer and the winter of 1919. It's called Red Summer because of the blood that was spilled in these towns, from New York to DC to one of the most famous, Elaine, Arkansas, where over 1,000 people were murdered and destroyed just from racial animosity. So all of that happened. Again, over a dozen of those happened in a 6-month period of time in 1919. So of all of these black communities that were prospering because of segregation, because of Jim Crow, that led to these communities actually being self-reliant and depending on each other and spending their dollars among themselves, the most prospered of all these communities was Greenwood. And so you have this animosity, this racial animosity building up. World War I in 1919, many soldiers returning from the war, jobs were difficult to find. White soldiers who returned were finding life and the economy down, but yet you could look across the railroad tracks in Tulsa and see this prospering community of black citizens driving nice cars, wearing mink fur coats, having business and depending upon themselves and enjoying life. And it built this huge amount of animosity. And so citizens were looking for, or I should say there was what we refer to as this tinderbox of animosity that all it needed was a striking of a match to get it ablaze. And that incident would be the incident between a 19-year-old black boy by the name of Dick Rowland and a 17-year-old elevator operator by the name of Sarah Page in the Drexler building. You see here, Dick Rowland went to the Drexler building to use the restroom. The third floor of the Drexler building was the only place downtown that had what they refer to as colored restrooms. He gets on the elevator, and as the elevator goes down, there's a shifting, there's something that takes place, but he trips and almost falls. He reaches out to steady himself and he grabs Sarah Page's arm. She lets out a scream. When the elevator settles, the door opens up, he runs out. The clerk across the street heard the scream, came to Sarah Page's aid, and by the time that the Tulsa Tribune at that time reported in the paper, imagine as if you are a person of the Ku Klux Klan and you open your paper and on the front page, you see nab Negro for attacking girl in an elevator. What it did to set tempers ablaze in certain segments of Tulsa. And I will hone in on a couple of paragraphs here. It says here about the third paragraph, a few minutes later, he entered the elevator, she claimed, and attacked her, scratching her hands and face and tearing her clothes. Her screams brought a clerk from the Renberg store to her assistance and the Negro fled. Let's go to the very bottom paragraph. Tenants of the Drexel building said the girl is an orphan who works as an elevator operator to pay her way through college. The statements that you just read with me there are what was referred to in the 1990s, early 1900s as yellow journalism. Yellow journalism was something that was very prevalent in news journalists around the country at that time. Basically, who could spin and tell the most salacious story to sell newspapers. I say this with intentionality and with humor. We are not the first ones to experience fake news. Fake news has been around for quite some time. And even in this, the accusing him of basically, it paints the story that this black man tries to rape this young lady in broad daylight in Tulsa. Sarah Page, when they tried to press charges and get her to pursue charges, she would not agree. She would not affirm, because these statements were all made up. He did not do any of this. And she said, he didn't do that to me. The portion at the bottom where it says she was an orphan, paying her way, working to pay her way through business school. She was not an orphan. She was not going to business school. All of this was made up by the Tulsa Tribune. And again, the effects of it is that it set the mindset of some in Tulsa that enough is enough. We cannot take this. We are going to do something about it. And so as I speak through the rest of this presentation, without getting into all the significant detail, Dick Rowland is arrested. He's brought to the courthouse, and rumors of a lynching is going to take place. A mob of about 1,000 white men surround the courthouse. About 36 black men from Greenwood who served in World War I get their ammunition, and they go downtown to the courthouse, not to cause a problem, but to protect Dick Rowland. They wanted to surround the courthouse to keep him from being lynched. And as you can see here at the bottom of this article, about 10 p.m., this is May 31st, 1921, E.S. McQueen, one of the members of the mob, confronted one of the black men, and he tries to disarm and take the gun away from Mr. Johnny Cole. They wrestle over the gun. It discharges about 10:30, and as more than one person observed, quote, all hell broke loose and the massacre begins. And the next 16 to 18 hours, a total annihilation and destruction of Greenwood took place. In the days afterwards, once martial law was declared, the black men of Greenwood were interned and taken to what we would call today Brady Theater. And then it was the convention hall. They were kept there for several weeks, and women and children were taken to the fairgrounds. And so this left Greenwood defenseless for several weeks up until around the mid of July. And so what buildings were not destroyed, they were looted. And many homes, many businesses, money was taken, clothing, cars were stolen. Basically, Greenwood was just defenseless. And that's where many of the people lost their belongings that wasn't destroyed by fire. And this took place again from about June 1st, 2nd, all the way to about July the 7th. These people were interned, and it wasn't until the American Red Cross actually came in, and many of the participants, or many of those who experienced their aid and their help, referred to them as angels of mercy, and the work that they did to help reestablish and help get black citizens back to their properties and build tent cities and feed them and clothe them for the next year or so. And so you have this remarkable story of a rebuild. Within 1 year, the first building starts being rebuilt in Greenwood. By year 5, by 1926, 80 to 90% of Greenwood is rebuilt. And by 1926, the National Negro Chamber of Commerce actually has their national meeting right in Greenwood by 1926. And I tell people, give it perspective. You can't have a national, remember there's segregation, there's Jim Crow. So black citizens coming for a Chamber of Commerce couldn't stay in hotels in downtown Tulsa. So you would have to have hotels, restaurants, places for people to go and stay for you to hold a national meeting. So 1926, they're holding a national meeting. And that's remarkable in the fact that 100%, almost all of the citizens could not file any claims for insurance purposes for their homes and their businesses that were destroyed because it was labeled a riot, because they called this a race riot. Many of these citizens could not claim any financial remuneration from their insurance or from the city or state or the Tulsa Police Department, who all were complicit. And so that speaks to the wealth in these black communities around the country and around Oklahoma that pooled their money together and sent resources in so they could rebuild their community, and rebuild they did. They rebuilt Greenwood really bigger and better than it was in 1921. The peak of all the economic activity of Greenwood actually hits in 1943 when there are over 1,200 Black homes, there's over 200 Black-owned businesses, there are over 3 hospitals, over 7 grocery stores, and the list goes on and on. That happened after 1921. And again, this is a part of history that people just really, it's just amazing, because everybody thinks that time stood still in 1921, and many are surprised to find out it was rebuilt and actually came back bigger and better than it was. So then the next question is, what happened? Why the decline? If it was so great, it was so prosperous, then why do we only have a smidgen or just a slight percentage of what was left and what was prominent? And we talk about that in the History Center, that there were 3 things that led to that. Number one, the impact of integration and what it did to the Black community. The building of the I-244 highway that split right through the heart of Greenwood, eminent domain that destroyed many Black businesses and Black homes, and literally went right through the middle of what was historic Greenwood. And then the third thing is just the decline, the overall decline of the economic activity and Black citizens wanting their children to go to school, to go to college, to leave Oklahoma, become successful, be the first person in our family to graduate from college, be a doctor, a lawyer, a business person, and that they did by the droves, and they never came back. And so many of these mom and pop shops in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, when they died out, many of their businesses that did remain died out with them. And those were the 3 major things that really led to the second decline of Greenwood. So why are we doing all this? Why are we giving you this history? This leads to the final exhibit called The Journey to Reconciliation, an amphitheater style space area that allows for people to actually sit down and have these discussions around race. And so this will be an area where people will sit, where Black citizens, white citizens, those at every and all capacities of our society can sit down in a safe space and have these discussions, be able to have the discussions about how you deal with these difficult things that we deal with as a society. If Greenwood Rising was here today, I use this as an example, the number of programs that we would have hosted at this point so that a community can talk about how do you deal with an Ahmaud Arbery shooting, a Black man running through a southern neighborhood and gets shot and killed. How do you deal with that? A space where we can talk about that, the realities of that. How do you deal with the aftermath of a George Floyd and the incidents that have happened over our country since that? How does a community like Tulsa, still reeling and still healing from the shooting of a Terrence Crutcher and the different divisive sides that look at that and have different aspects, when we can sit down in a space and actually give you a perspective of my life through my eyes, where we can have respectful dialogue and just get you to see who I am through my shoes and through my eyes, you might have a different perspective of the other person that you never would have had before. You can change as many laws and many policies and ordinances on the books, but until you change my heart and my mind and the way I perceive you, we're going to still keep going around this axle over and over. So Greenwood Rising is going to be a place of healing, a place in the center of Tulsa, the center of Oklahoma, the center of America, where people can come and actually experience healing from racial trauma and have racial dialogue for reconciliation and racial harmony. I think you can admit with me now, Greenwood Rising is a need needed now more than ever in our history. And so we've had several people that have donated from large amounts to small amounts. You can see here the overwhelming philanthropic community and the corporate community that have given significantly to the building Greenwood Rising. And the one thing that we're proud about is that not only for these significant large donations, but inside Greenwood, we are going to have a larger than life donor wall that will showcase every person that gave any amount to the building of this green. We want everyone that comes here to see that this is a community effort. This wasn't just people who had money and foundations, but if you give $100, your name's going on the wall. If you give $50, whatever an amount a person sends in, we're going to have every name displayed on that wall. It's not about logos and corporations getting their recognition. It's about people seeing that the community came together. And I'm going to use the words from Sarah and John Graves, who gave, and they sent me an email, and they said, it's not about people seeing that our name's on the wall. He said, it's about my children and my grandchildren years from now coming to see that we were on the right side of history. That's why I want to give to this. And so, we want anyone, even you, if you want to know how you can support this effort. We're still about $3 to $4 million shy of our $30 million goal for all of our planning for the building of Greenwood Rising and the planning we're doing for 2021 and the substantive events that we'll have. Please, visit our website at tulsa2021.org. As you can see there, Dr. Schumann actually placed it in the chat, and you can go there and see this information, see all that we're doing, see a calendar of events, stay up to date on everything, sign up for our newsletter, and then you can also go and click and donate. Tulsa Community Foundation 501c3 is the repository for all of our funds. So there are all your donations at any point, and placing your name and telling us what name, even if you want to give in name of someone. We want that to be a part of what we're doing. So again, this is the 30,000 level view of Greenwood Rising and the work of the commission. We are here because in 2015, African-American State Senator Kevin Matthews started having these discussions that I'm talking about, the power of a conversation, sitting down with those across the aisle. And the friend of the commission, what I call him, Senator James Langford, U.S. Senator Langford, has been tremendous in bringing attention, bringing his political acumen and his own personal understanding. And I'm using his words. White citizens like me need to embrace, be educated by this, be enlightened by this, and see how we can come together over this. And so here in Oklahoma, a Black Democrat and a white Republican from Oklahoma put their ideological differences aside, and they say, we as Oklahomans need to come together over this, learn from this, and see how we can actually be a model to the nation of healing and reconciliation for economic development and educational initiatives for this Greenwood history and for the Greenwood district going forward. So we're proud of that. We don't shy away from it. In fact, it's that model of their friendship that we have embraced as a commission, bipartisan from all aspects of this community. And as you can see by the support that we're getting, tremendous support, that is the message that really brings people to the table to say, how can I be a part? So again, I know this is a lot of information, a lot of history, a lot of what we're doing, but I did want to carve out some time here. I think we have till 12 noon if there is anyone that wants to put any comments in the chat, or Dr. Schumann, if you have any questions or any statements at this point, please ask me. Let me know. Let's talk about some things.
First, I want to just thank you. That was fantastic. Absolutely. Every time I hear it gets better. It seems like the plans are constantly being refined. One question, there's lots of people chiming in with thanks. I thought I could start off the questions by asking you talked about the physical structure, the building, the square footage, and some of the areas and displays. I know, and you mentioned Hannibal Johnson, who's basically is the de facto historian of the Greenwood district. He is assumed, if I'm not mistaken, a curatorial role and has access to a trove of many artifacts, letters, things. So there may be many in our audience who are multi-generational Oklahomans. I guess I'm putting in a plug for you to answer the question if people have information pertaining to early statehood or early African-American experience in Oklahoma, what can they do, or where should they maybe share those artifacts?
That's excellent segue. It's almost like I sent you that, and then say this at the end. Yeah, say this at the end. That was excellent. And by the way, I did not. That's just as I said before. Having phenomenal people on the Centennial Commission like Dr. Schumann to bring those points up. Yes, Hannibal Johnson is leading our curatorial team. We have a person named John West Bay, who designs museum and is an expert in museum design out of Washington, D.C., African-American, who is on the curatorial team, representative from local projects. We have a local consultant named Stephanie DeVergis, who's also helping, but Hannibal Johnson's leading. He's the lead curatorial person that's for collecting and these stories and artifacts. You can actually contact on our website, go to the Tulsa 2021. If you have history, information, artifacts, please go to the website. It comes to me and Warren Fusilier, who's actually is a GKFF fellow that helps me here in the office, and we gather that, we provide it to the team so they can contact you. In addition, on the website, there is a request for narratives in collaboration with OCCJ, which is led by Moises Echeverria. We're actually asking for people to share their history, to share their stories, actually there's a place on the website, go to narratives, and you submit your name and give us your story. And we will be selecting actually some of those stories to be showcased and possibly interviewed for a video production to that we can release in 2021. So if you have that history and want to share it, please, one of those both avenues right there at the website.
Many thank yous, including one I love here. I just want to quote that says, "Thank you for this information. I have a lot of new wrinkles in my brain," which is very reflective of what you said. Another question that somebody has asked here, just in the general chat for everyone, is how does one volunteer to serve if one is interested in serving more, if one is inspired by the message or the, the hope?
I love to hear when someone says, "How can I help?" So again, on the website, sign up for our newsletter, but there's also, you can go and sign up for one of the committees. This is a public commission. So for those that, now the opportunity to serve is difficult because a lot of the meetings are during the day when you have like subcommittee meetings. But you can sign up and get the information from those subcommittee meetings and be a part when they have the Zoom calls. But there is also sign up to be a volunteer. I'm going to need many volunteers, not only to become docents and do tours of Greenwood Rising, but we're expecting, COVID or not, here they come. There are people that are already booking hotel rooms and are going to be here from the end of May all the way to the end of June, because we'll have Juneteenth right after we do the commemoration. And so people are planning family vacations, planning company outings all around this history to be in Greenwood. And we're gonna need people to give people tours. I'm gonna need people just to answer phone calls. As we get closer to 2021, volunteering, yes, there's gonna be a citywide call for volunteers, and we're gonna set up training sessions and times for you to go through Greenwood Rising, get the history. And so please sign up and say, "I wanna be a volunteer," and you can do that on the website.
Phil, are there specific, just thinking ahead with your calendar, it's just going to get, like, I imagine as we get closer to the event, there will be more and more, closer to the unveiling and to the commemoration of May 31st, June 1st, 2021, there will be more events. Are there any you can preview with us as far as dates go? And I know things are still flexible, and I know COVID has changed kind of everything, but.
Yes, even with, so we've had to the reason we would have gone out with a national broadcast of, save the date for these dates, but, COVID really has made us step back and kind of like plan in a way that, our events will be, if I could say, a COVID mindset. So things that would have been inside, we're planning for outside. The bookend dates that I tell people, all things commemorative will begin Wednesday, May 26th, and go all the way through Sunday, June the 6th. Those will be the timeline. It will begin actually with the John Hope Franklin's Symposium for Reconciliation. This will be the 11th year that they've done it, and it'll be a prominent year, of course. That'll be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We recommend you sign up for that. We're supporting that and buying a table, and we'll be promoting and highlighting their work and what they'll be doing. And then that weekend, there is going to be activities. There's going to be music events. There's going to be so many other organizations, not just us doing things, but the Centennial events will really begin Sunday. We're going to have a Unity Faith Day where different groups and churches and ecumenical members will come from all over the state to do a walk around Greenwood. That will take place on the 30th. May 31st is actually the Centennial commemorative event that we're planning, a worldwide national broadcast event that'll take place. At this point, will be outdoors in the Driller Stadium. That's actually in historic Greenwood. There's going to be opportunities for seating basically everywhere with jumbotrons in and outside, so that people can be, and where, this will be a top produced event that will recognize the 100th Centennial. Can't give you the names of who the keynote address speakers are and the lineup, but I can say that we'll have a much more robust way of telling you after the election. So we're waiting till after the election to know, the availability of different individuals, just to give you an understanding of how high level of an event, a worldwide event we're planning for that day. We'll have a National Day of Learning on the next day for a full day webinar, and some of the teaching that we do and the curriculum that we share for our Summer Teachers Institute Wednesday is going to be June the 2nd. It's going to be a dedication of the building Greenwood Rising. June the 4th, that Thursday, we're going to have a citywide film festival where several theaters will be showing films from Greenwood and Black Wall Street, and it will be headlined as a community forum between African-American actor Tim Reed and local author Clifton Talbert that wrote Once Upon a Time We Were Colored, and that movie and the success of that. Friday will be another significant big event that will take place in Greenwood District. This will all be capped off by a Dreamland Again event between the Tulsa Symphony Orchestra and a community chorus that will have an outdoor event then. And then Sunday, we're going to have a Greenwood run, a 5, 10, and 15K run that will be headlined by Benita Cooper and Silhouette Sneaker and Art that many of the community is going to come in. So it's going to be a all things Centennial. And then one weekend after that, you've got Juneteenth. So just plan to be here all the month of May and June is all I can say.
That's great advice. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your vision, your expertise, and your organizational wizardry. I mean, the number of events is truly breathtaking, but as you know, I've discussed with you that Tulsa will be the center of the world's attention May 31st and June 1st in those days surrounding that in 2021. So it's, something certainly to look forward to, but is also, obviously for very, very, difficult reasons, but not burying it and bringing it to the surface and discussing it and working to both show resilience and reconciliation, I think are very worthwhile goals.
Dr. Schumann, if I can answer one more, I think it's so important Danielle Smith, you asked an excellent question. Are we going to be collaborating with the 2 survivors of the descendants? We are actually working on getting in touch with, and we already have, with the direct descendants. For example, J.B. Stratford family that relocated to Chicago, the Smitherman family, who was the A.J. Smitherman that had the newspaper in Greenwood, and his family relocated to Buffalo and various other areas of the country. We actually are slowly connecting with them and hoping to being able to have some opportunity for them to come back and breathe here and support that, so they'll be here. The 2 remaining survivors, Mother Randall, who lives here in North Tulsa. She's 104 years old. Her health is of a concern, and so connecting with her is something that members of our commission have done, but being able to interact with her on a regular basis with COVID and where she is with health-wise is a challenge. And there's one other survivor, I think that may be 107 that we've been heard of, but know about. But their ability to be here at that time and try to celebrate and acknowledge them in the Green Rising History Center is of utmost importance. And that's what I wanted to address.
Thank you for noticing that and getting that in on the question. And and Dan also says, as the last plug and reminder, attend her family's Zoom and Learn on November 2nd. And I guess if you didn't get the email today, I would suggest emailing either Tracy Kennedy or Bonnie Rucker. That's brucker@ou.edu or tkennedy@ou.edu. And you can get the Zoom information to register for that. That's going to be on Monday, November 2nd at noon. Phil, thank you so much for joining us. And I think your time will get more precious as it gets closer, but maybe it'll be worth having you back in the spring just to, talk about various events and other ways we can help individuals.
That would be excellent. I think that would be great, because the Pathway to Hope will be almost done, and the building will be able to show more work progress, and then we'll definitely have basically, hey, it's time to sign up as volunteers. So we'll definitely have that opportunity.
Well, many thanks on behalf of everyone here at OU-Tulsa, and wish you a good day and some better weather for sure.
Yes, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.